Welcome to Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions, the podcast where real life meets big dreams. I'm Johanna, your host, and every episode will dive into inspiring stories from PAs, doctors, and professionals who are also dreamers and mission-driven changemakers. From the hospital halls to the hearts of our homes, and even into communities across the world, we'll laugh, learn, and uncover the challenges, triumphs, and everything in between as we see life through each other's perspectives. Looking for more joy and balance in your career? Don't miss our free guide, How to Be a Fulfilled Provider, your quick boost of encouragement with tips to help you thrive while juggling all your hats you wear. And if you've got little dreamers at home, check out Little Evie's Big Dreams on Amazon. These stories are meant to spark imagination, courage, and kindness, perfect for bedtime or anytime. Follow along as Evie, a little Sri Lankan girl, brings joy and creativity to her community while daring to dream big. This podcast is also brought to you with love by the Ephraim Foundation International, because empowering children and families in rural Sri Lanka isn't just charity, it's continuing a legacy of hope and creating futures full of possibility. So grab your cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and get ready for uplifting conversations that will leave you inspired and equipped to make a greater impact. Let's jump in. Hi friends, welcome back to Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions. Today's guest is Rebekah Blankenship. She is a board-certified physician assistant with advanced certification in pediatrics and extensive experience in pediatric surgery, hospitalist medicine, and newborn care. She's been nationally recognized for her research in pediatric trauma and now brings that same heart for excellence and compassion into her work as the founder of Nurtured Nest, where she helps mothers navigate feeding, sleeping, and development with evidence-based wisdom that's deeply rooted in both medicine and motherhood. In this conversation, we'll talk about the raw and real transition into motherhood, the identity shift that happens in the early postpartum season, and how God uses those sleepless, humbling days to squeeze out every selfishness and shape something eternal in us. We also dive into one of the most difficult crossroads many women face, whether to return to work, reduce hours, or stay home. Rebekah shares how she's learned to let the Lord guide that decision and why so many mothers find themselves having to make that choice. We explore how to find peace, purpose, and identity when life doesn't look like we planned, and how to lean on faith and community through it all. If you've ever wrestled with what it means to balance your professional calling with your role as a mother, or felt that tension between what you can do and what you're called to do, this episode will meet you right where you are. So let's join in. Thank you so much, Rebekah, for taking the time out of your day to join me on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and so, I guess let's start off with, you worked in pediatric surgery. You also have a lot of research in pediatric trauma, which is very unique, and, hospital medicine, and now you're starting this new journey of Nurtured Nest. Can you share what inspired your transition from clinical medicine to parent education and coaching?
Yeah, definitely. It's a little bit due to my own jolt into motherhood, but
Mhm.
really over the past decade, I've had a lot of different experiences in the field of maternal child health, most of which has been clinical, then with my research, like you were sharing. And I've really enjoyed that. I've loved getting to help moms and babies and families. And I've just found that working with moms and children is really a passion of mine. And so
Yeah.
I had been enjoying that and really felt like I was thriving in the clinical world in pediatric surgery. But I had my daughter, Selah, earlier this year in
Mhm.
January, and that really kind of launched me on a new journey and discovery and a lot of relearning myself and figuring out what life is like with a little one and raising a family. And I say my jolt into motherhood because I just realized how overwhelming the early stages of motherhood are. I personally didn't ever feel very overwhelmed thinking about motherhood because I just assumed have all of this knowledge and experience with kids. I think it'll be fine. I'll know what to do. Which maybe was a little naive of me, but it's so different when it's your own child and
Mhm,
when it's not something you can really step away from. You know, work is you go in, you work your hours, you leave, and then you're home and you're doing your own thing, but once you have a little one, it's 24/7. And so, as I was navigating that and figuring out motherhood, I felt overwhelmed, and I also realized I think there's a gap here in knowledge and resources, and I just realized as I was trying to help Selah with getting her to sleep well and helping her with feeding and navigating breastfeeding, all these things that come up in the early stages of motherhood. I found myself looking in so many different places, whether it was literally Googling in the middle of the night or texting my sister, my mom, my friends, reading books, drawing on my clinical background, all these places to ultimately form conclusions and an understanding of what I needed to do in each of those areas, but it took a lot of time and effort, and so once I had done it, I was like, "Gosh, this was a lot harder than I feel like it should be," and I started realizing my friends had a lot of the same questions, and what I had learned was able to really help them, and so my own journey in this and then helping others made me realize, I think there's a gap that I could really step into, and this kind of aligned with also wanting to step away from my role in clinical medicine to have more time at home. And so the
mhm.
combination of the two kind of set me on this journey of starting Nurtured Nest.
Yeah, it's really interesting how, especially having the first baby, it completely changes your life, which is obvious, but in such a like a intrinsic way, like mentally and mindset wise. And I know when I had my little one too, it just made you rethink the way you want to live your life and your purpose and your calling and everything else around that. And I felt, yeah, it's like this journey that you go through, and your whole mindset shifts towards how can I, be better and live better for my child. I think
Yeah.
that's what it kind of comes down to.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing how I think each of us takes that journey. Of course, every journey is totally different in how we maneuver around those decisions and thought processes. But, your journey kind of went towards creating this nurtured nest, based on also just how how you said you felt naively confident
Yes.
going into motherhood and
It's humbling.
realizing
I
that.
think sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead, yeah.
It's so humbling, and I think, or at least for myself, I've seen God seems to set up these, like, mile markers throughout life that humble you, and,
Yeah,
or at least from in my life, and so I feel like every time I'm starting to kind of feel like, "Okay, I've got this, and things are going well, and I have life figured out," the next thing comes, and it just humbles you again. I mean, that's how PA
yeah,
school was. The beginning of PA
uh-huh,
school is like drinking from a fire hydrant, and you're just like,
yes.
"Oh my gosh." I remember coming home to my husband saying, like, "This is impossible. No one can learn this much information this fast." And then starting out as a PA felt very
Mhm,
similar, it's just a whole different level of responsibility and
mhm,
the patient load and the emotional aspect of dealing with family is, I mean, it's just a
yeah,
lot, and so there's been
yeah,
all these times in life. Marriage is another one where I feel like God sets these things up to continually humble us right when we're starting to, get a little too high, so it's good, but,
yeah,
I mean, it's hard.
yeah. I think, I like that train of thought. Let's go with it for a little bit, 'cause, ultimately, when you talk about marriage, parenting, and all these, like, major transitions in life, especially for us, going through PA school and then medicine also is just when you think biblically for a second, when we think of like sacrificial love, dedication, and surrender. I feel like, marriage, of course, is that it's like you're surrendering your not your will, but you're surrendering your life into this partnership with another human being to journey along with. And of course, that's going to with all the tension and the learning opportunities, as I like to
Yep.
say, as you get to like live life 100% with them, right?
Mhm.
And in the same way, you're, transition into work and medicine, especially medicine, because everything is kind of life and death.
Yeah.
It really is because
Yeah.
you're working with people's lives and every decision you're making for treatment plans, for diagnosing them, for different, things that you're going to do for their health and benefit affects them critically. And so you're surrendering your ego to understand that you need to learn from others. You need to
Mhm.
work as a part of a team and a partner with your patient too on some of that journey as well.
Mhm.
And so it's definitely humbling. It's definitely
Yes.
humbling
Yes.
because we all go into it like quite confidently,
Yeah.
but then we realize soon where we belong.
Yes, it's true. That first 6 months in practice was wow, I don't think I guess I entered it naively, but I think this is kind of how life is set up by God for our
Yeah,
benefit. But
yeah,
similar to motherhood, when I
mhm,
graduated PA
yeah,
school, I felt like, "I'm ready, I'm so excited to be a PA, and I love practicing medicine, and
yeah,
if my preceptors say I'm ready, but then, like you're saying, it's just a whole another level of responsibility, and
yeah,
it did really weigh heavily on especially
mhm,
working in pediatrics. I mean, these are anyone's life is precious, but when you're working with people's children and
yeah,
it's heavy. So, but each of those
yeah,
different transitions, I think, not only is God humbling us, but I think He can use them to prepare us for the next step in our journey. And thinking about what you're saying, I mean, I did starting out, I had to ask so many questions. You feel stupid when you're starting out because you're like, okay, I just went to school and got my master's and studied really hard and learned all this information. And then you get out in the real world and there's still so much you don't know. And I remember in pediatric surgery in particular, I went back and pulled my notes out from PA school, and so many of the clinical plan in my notes was like, "Call pediatric surgery," and then I was like, "But wait, I am ped surgery. What am I supposed to do?" And so there's just so much in these, like, subspecialties where you're learning on the job, and so you
mhm,
have to be humble, and you
yeah,
have to go ask, your supervising physician or your other APPs that you're working with, and just ask and
mhm,
learn and be even the nurses, I learned a lot from the nurses, and that's humbling, you
yeah,
know? Here I am with this degree, and I'm supposed to be telling you what to do, and sometimes you know more than me because you've treated this more than I have.
mhm, exactly,
So, but I think that also prepared me for the part of motherhood of realizing I don't know what I'm doing and I need to go ask for help. I need to go find answers instead
yeah,
of just trying to wing it.
yeah, yeah, I know. It's funny because just yesterday we were talking to, new parents, and they were talking about, asking like, "So what did you do with your daughter for," because with sleeping or crying and, "How did you get through it?" And I was like, "I don't remember really." But, it was just I felt like and I was, like, saying, I think I felt like I did everything wrong by the standards that, people keep
Yeah.
saying, "Don't hold your baby. Don't let the baby
Yeah.
sleep on you." At the time, that's, like, was huge, but I'm like, we did what we had to get through the time, and I'm really kind of glad we did those things because now she's
Oh.
so big and I wish I could hold her like she was when she was a
Yeah.
little baby, things like that,
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that, sometimes we feel like we're doing things wrong or the wrong way, but with wisdom and of course
Mhm.
prayerfully, we should, realize, well, we're doing things in how we can, survive
Yeah.
the chaos and the insanity of those early months. And, that's kind of where you're coming into, um, with this nurtured nest is coming alongside these parents who are struggling, to find out, like, how do I make it through?
Mhm.
And so, and thinking of like just motherhood, the early postpartum period is such a mix of emotions,
Mhm.
of course, joy, exhaustion, and then that identity shifts is which is what we were talking about earlier, with how our mindset changes and we feel things are changing in our identities, which it has from, just a woman to a mother.
Yeah.
And so, from your medical background and personal experience, what are some of the most common misconceptions new moms have about this particular season?
Yeah. I think there's a lot. I think one of the biggest ones I find is that it's commonly thought that it will all just come naturally, and I thought
Mhm,
that. I thought,
mhm,
especially with my knowledge base and my experience, it will just come naturally.
yeah,
And some things do, right? I think there was, like, an innate mothering spirit and nature and, like, wanting
mhm,
to love my baby and nurture her and protect her and help her. Those things did come naturally. But there's a lot of other things like breastfeeding and those sorts of things that they don't come naturally, they're learned, and you often need help with them, and I think that that misconception that it should be natural can hinder
mhm,
people from asking for help because if they think it's supposed to be natural and then it isn't going well, like breastfeeding, for instance,
mhm,
then it can bring some guilt or shame or feeling of like, "Well, what's wrong with me that I can't?" I hear this a
mhm,
lot, like, "What's wrong with me? I can't even feed my baby." And most of the time, there's nothing wrong with you, you just need some help and you need to learn a skill. It's a skill and an art, and you've never done it before,
yeah,
and so you need guidance. So that I think that's a big one. One that I hear a lot and always don't know how to respond exactly when I hear friends say it, but they'll tell me, "Oh, well, I was a nanny or I babysat, so I'm not worried. I've done this
yeah,
before." And you always wanna kinda laugh, but while those experiences definitely can be helpful and give you some sort of
mhm,
idea of baby development and types of activities suited them, that sort of stuff, it is so different when it's your own. And people told me
mhm,
that too, pediatrics, I would hear that all the time, "Oh, it'll be so different when it's your own," or well, how do you do pediatrics? I could never. It'll be different when you have one. And it was all just kind of, I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it really is so different when it's your own child. It changes so much. Even the crying, like when you babysit someone's child and they cry, it's a very different experience than when your baby is crying. What it
yeah,
does to you, like even biologically in your brain and how you experience that and the amount of stress and anxiety that that can bring is just totally different when it's someone else's child.
right,
And I mean, I experienced that with my work too. Once I had Selah and I went back to work in pediatric surgery, it was actually hard for me. I was like, wow, I am having a much harder time now with these patient cases than before I had children because I just see Selah in these kids, and I'm thinking about how I would feel with Selah, and in some ways that was great because it really deepened my compassion for people and my empathy and my desire to, like, just really, really try to help them and go out of my way, and then in other ways that it was hard, it made work a lot heavier when I, came home after a long day, especially if we lost a patient or if things like that just hit a lot different.
yeah,
So yeah, that's another one. Another misconception that I think is really hard for people is everyone thinks the newborn stage and the baby stage in general is dreamy and that everyone else, on social media or
mhm,
whatever looks like they love it and they're just thriving and you just snuggle this baby and you just and that's kind of what I
mhm.
thought too. I was like, wow, I get 3 months off work. And what am I even gonna do with myself? I'm gonna be bored. But no, you're not bored on maternity leave. I mean, it just really is so much to learn and to adapt to. And depending on, how your baby's temperament is, depending on how their
Yeah,
health is in those first months, how your own recovery
mhm,
is, the support you have, all those things can impact how it goes. And I'm sure there are people out there who have a dreamy, maternity leave, but a lot of it isn't, and so I think
Mhm.
because on social media, a lot of times we're only seeing the pictures of when the baby's smiling and they're out,
Uh,
and the mom is out at the zoo with the baby, or, we're only seeing those moments.
yeah.
We're not seeing, like, the witching hour where the baby didn't stop crying for an hour and a half and you were ready to pull your hair out because 'cause you're like, "I literally don't know what to do,"
Yeah.
or, how painful breastfeeding can be in that first week or
Mhm.
so. Then if baby's weight gain is it's just all the things that can go on in those first weeks and months.
Mhm.
I think we have a really, like, false perception in our society, and in some ways, America tends to do this, I think, our culture, in general. A lot of life, like, a lot of real life is kind of shielded and
Mhm.
private, and same thing with death. A lot of people don't experience death in America until, it's someone really close to them because we don't talk about it. Funerals aren't generally, like, a very publicized thing. It's just very hush hush private, and I think that's
Mhm.
how motherhood and postpartum is too, and so until you kind of again, get thrown out into this little storm, then you just kind of have no idea.
Yeah.
At least that's how I experienced it.
That's really interesting because I was just listening to another podcast about that particular point. They were talking about something completely different, but they did touch on trauma and how, because of the culture in the US, kind of disembodies that ability to grieve and understanding
Mm,
of how to grieve and understand loss. It compounds trauma sometimes because you're not able to deal with it immediately and you dissociate from it. And then you're just postponing dealing with all that underlying trauma. And therefore, things just build up, or then you just continue down the path that is really just not going to help you or be beneficial. And I
mm,
think, sometimes, motherhood and having a baby, depending on the situation, the things that people have to go through, if there's health outcomes that are not expected or birthing processes that were not, ideal or what people expected, those are different types of things that can cause some trauma. There's
right, right.
various levels of trauma. And so, yeah, you're right. If we're not able to grieve those processes, and really especially when people, my goodness, when I was going through the prenatal programs and birthing classes and all these things, you're just thinking of this ideal thing and, having a not whether it be medicated or not medicated, but, you don't expect to go through a C-section or, different things. And you're having all these expectations. And then there were people in the class who had like written lists and lists of things they had wanted and all these things, and they're like, "Write down all these list of the ideal birthing experience." I'm like, "How do I even know what that's gonna be like?" And then, of course,
Yeah.
I ended up with a C-section for mine. But,
Oh,
especially for those who have, like, high expectations, it can be so, like, devastating when things don't go your way, and if you're not dealing with that, even just the grief of that ideal experience can be traumatizing sometimes for some
yeah,
people.
yeah,
And then going back to your point about breastfeeding too, I mean, I think that's like a huge point and a huge misconception because every one of us who, pregnant, everyone is like breastfeeding. They don't ever really talk about just how difficult it is going to be
yes,
and how unnatural it
yes,
is. Everyone's just like breastfeed, breastfeed, breastfeed as long as you can, as long as you can. But then when you get there, you're like, it's really not as easy as people expect. And then
yeah,
you just see these, social media posts where people are, posting, I have massive amounts, or
yeah,
I remember talking about it with a colleague, and they were like, there's, people who would love to, boast about it, and they're
yep,
like, "Oh, I filled up my fridge and my other freezer and my other freezer. I had milk for days and I had, like,
yep,
then, that kind of, then if there's other people who aren't, able to, produce or have that experience, then it just kind of is like, well, you failed as a mother already. Day 1 and you can't even do the job right, you know?
Yeah.
And that's like a hard thing to process too, right?
Absolutely, and social media is can be a helpful thing, but it's often so hurtful, and I think it's just added one
Mhm.
more layer to this whole, to breastfeeding, to motherhood in general, but they say comparison is the thief of joy, and I think that's so true, because
Yeah.
you see all these posts about people showing how much milk they produce and
Mhm.
oftentimes those people have an oversupply and actually end up with lots of complications and have a hard time because they actually have way too much milk and they've
Mhm.
done things that have caused their body to produce, enough milk to feed twins or triplets and then trying to, like, wean that down, I mean, it can be a
Yeah.
nightmare. Oversupply is,
Mm.
like I always tell people, like, you don't want an oversupply. You want
Yeah.
enough to feed your baby and maybe a little bit extra just to, like, give yourself some peace of mind and a little bit of flexibility, but you don't
Right.
want thousands and thousands of ounces,
Yeah.
and but because we have these social media, this at our
Mhm.
fingertips, it's just all this is getting posted, and I feel
Mhm.
like it's always something. It's, in breastfeeding, there's the comparison of having too much or not enough,
Mhm.
and then, but then there's with breastfeeding, there definitely like it's a challenging thing to keep going. And if you go back to work and you're pumping, I mean, can be
Mhm.
in some ways a burden and even if it's not a burden, it's still like a sacrifice to do that. And
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
then you can compare yourself on the flip side to the moms who are just doing formula and you're like, gosh, their life is so much easier. They don't have to worry about pumping. They don't have to deal with all of these, things that come up with breastfeeding or worry about their supply or I think it can just go in any direction. And
Mhm.
the key is really just trying to not compare and focusing
Exactly.
on, what the Lord has given you and what's before you and being faithful with that and trying to use wisdom to navigate your own circumstances,
Mhm.
but really doing your best to not compare. I wasn't
Yeah.
actually on social media until I started. Well, I had a Facebook to, like, keep up with, like, family
Right,
and
right.
things,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I hadn't had an Instagram since, like, my sophomore year of college, and I've never
Uh-huh.
had TikTok or things like that, and it was really nice because unless I physically talked to people, there wasn't a lot to compare to, so you're just
Mhm.
living your experience and,
Yeah.
you're kind of free to make that whatever it is,
Exactly.
but then
Yeah.
social media is just a whole 'nother layer.
Yeah. Yeah. It can get tough and it's yeah, trying to understand what's beneficial and then what's just ridiculous, because and what you really need to just stop looking at.
Yeah.
Sometimes, social media is just, everyone's trying to sell something too, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you gotta just know what are the motives behind everything. Do you want that or not? And look really closely at what you're putting into your own mind based on maybe what people are just trying to sell.
Right.
And so, yeah, but how can mothers balance? Oh, well, I just wanted to back up to this other one question. I kind of talked about it a little bit earlier too, but what advice do you give to moms who feel like they're not doing it right, and whether feeding, sleeping, or simply adjusting? Because I know we talked about comparison, but then there's moms who just feel like they're not doing it right, going back to even just, like, failing day 1 on breastfeeding, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard, and I
Mhm.
hear that all the time from my friends and people that I coach, and I've felt it myself. I think what I would say, first of all, is probably none of us are, at least in some aspects.
Yeah.
Um, there's so much in motherhood that's not black or white or right or wrong,
Mhm.
and I think that's a big difficulty and struggle for especially people like us oftentimes who are in the medical field. A lot of us are very type A and achievers, and we've always kind of had a plan, and then we
Yep.
execute our plan with excellence and we get the A plus
Yeah.
and the award and the scholarship and so we get this like continuous feedback of like you're
Mhm.
doing good, you're doing
Yeah.
good, you're doing good,
Mhm.
and that
Yeah.
feels so rewarding, and, I mean, a lot of us I know for myself, like, it's almost addicting. Like, I
Right.
my whole life have always
Yeah.
been that kind of person, and achieving feels good, but it's not just that it feels good, but it's also I think that it, like, affirms something in you of you're doing right or you're doing good, and that's one of the challenges for me in motherhood is a lot of times you might not get that even if you're
Mhm.
doing everything right. Baby sleep is one thing I help people with, and it
Mhm.
can be very complex. There's just so much going on in the first year of life,
Yeah.
and there's so many factors to it, and sometimes there definitely are, I will say, there definitely are things you can do to support good sleep and to promote healthy sleeping habits from a really young age, and there's a science to it. So there is some level that you can not control, but help manipulate. But there's another side to it that even if you do everything right and you follow all the rules and, you set them up for success, you do everything within your power, sometimes they still won't sleep well. And
Mhm.
like, that's hard, like, coming
Mhm.
to cope with that sort of thing. I mean, same thing with
Yeah.
feeding. Sometimes you've worked really hard, you have a good supply of breast milk, you've done all these things,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden they refuse the bottle, and you're like, "Well, what the heck am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like, how am I supposed to go to work if they won't take the bottle?" That happened to
Mhm.
me too. So there's a lot in motherhood that's out of your control, and that can be
Yeah.
really challenging. So I think knowing that ahead of time is helpful, and
Yeah.
for me personally, it's been
Mhm.
another way to reflect and realize I need to let go again or more
Mhm.
maybe. And then from there, ask for help is the biggest thing. Like, yeah, we might not be doing it right. And when you feel that or you recognize that, I think the best thing to do is go ask for help. Like, ask your friends, ask your
Yeah.
mom, find resources, call me. Like, these are the sorts of things that can help and help you to decide, am I doing it quote
Mhm.
unquote right? And maybe there's not a right, but like, am I doing what I can to help this be what I'm hoping for or
Mhm.
wanting? And then kind of letting go of the rest.
Mhm.
Also, giving yourself a lot of grace and time because motherhood is an art. The thing that I think is so fascinating about, well, two things I think are so fascinating about motherhood and babies in general. To some degree, babies all do the same things, and it's wonderfully fascinating. They go through these stages of development, and you will see the
Yeah.
same things in babies all around the world from different cultures, families, backgrounds,
Mhm.
religions, and they'll do these exact same little behaviors, and it's
Yeah.
hilarious to me.
Yeah.
And so that helps us because there is some level of science to it, and to some degree you can anticipate what's coming next. Every baby
Mhm.
is going to at some point start
Yeah.
crawling and then walking and
Yeah.
then talking, and
Mm.
so that can help guide us with the anticipation of what's next. But then on the other hand, every baby is unique and every mom is unique, and so then
Yeah.
every mom baby duo is
Mhm.
unique, and that's where the art of it comes, is there are
Yeah.
these kind of parameters and this knowledge that you can have to help guide you, but then how you apply that to your specific baby is the art part of it, and that takes time and a lot of patience and a lot of grace and sometimes messing up. Sometimes it takes, messing up to learn that that didn't work, and that's okay. Then you just redirect. But I think the most important part is having someone that can help you to navigate that, especially as a first-time mom, because it's really challenging to do it on your own. And sometimes it's as simple as someone like, being able to say, "You're doing it all right, it's just not working, and you just need time, or you just gotta get through this season," or, whatever. Sometimes it's literally just that, but having someone who can kind of affirm you and help you in that, or maybe they do redirect you and say,
Mhm.
"Hey, maybe staying up for 4 hours isn't really gonna work very well for your two-month-old," like, it just
Yeah.
depends on the situation, but yeah, I think most of us are probably not doing it all right,
Yeah.
and figuring out the art
Mm.
and then having people and resources that you can go to.
Exactly. Yeah. Letting go and knowing that we're not gonna be perfect and we're not gonna and the right way kind of is a very elusive myth sometimes. And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
and it kind of,
Which is hard
you
for
know,
people like us.
yeah, I loved how you like described it so well. Like sometimes people just want that like affirmation of what they're doing is right. Because they're used to seeing that. But you hold this little baby who's crying in front of you and you're like, she's definitely not telling me I'm doing it right. So you
Yeah.
don't get that affirmation.
Yes.
And so you're feeling like, oh my goodness, what do I do with this now?
Yes,
That's the hard
exactly.
part. That's where that art
Exactly.
comes in. And I loved how you also like talked about how like there's these milestones and developmental stages that occur across the world, no matter because we're all human, part of the human race, and we'll see that
Yeah.
those things achieved in all of our babies at some point or the other, and that's just
Mhm.
such a beautiful reminder of the beauty of life and diversity of life, right?
Yeah. Actually, one of our good friends, we do a house church in our house, and
Mhm.
so this family comes to our house every week for church, and they have a baby who's 9 months older than Selah, and so
Uh-huh.
he was here obviously before she was born, and they would come
Right.
every week, and as he was growing, there were different things in the house, like one in particular that's really funny is he would always go get the coasters. We have this set of coasters that's underneath the
Uh-huh.
coffee table. He always went and got the
Uh,
coasters after at around a certain age. The other thing was, like, the door stops. He all of a sudden, like, he
mhm.
hit one particular month, and he started playing with the door stops, and
Right. Yes,
then,
yes.
he hit another
Mhm.
stage, he starts pulling on the cabinets, and so it
Uh-huh.
was funny because
Yeah.
at the time, I didn't have a little one, and so we added
Mhm.
cabinet locks and did things, try to help with having a little one around, and then what's been so
Mhm.
funny with Selah is she has done the exact same things he did, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I remember when Zeke did that." She's obsessed with the coasters now. And
Right.
the door
Yes.
stops and pulling on the cabinets, but
Mhm.
it's just so funny because it's like
Yeah.
they're doing, like, the exact same things, and our families are very
Uh-huh.
different, and even actually
Right.
different ethnicity, and so it's just so funny
Yeah.
to me that they're, like,
Yeah.
mimicking each other, and I mean, obviously, Selah didn't see him do that because that was before she was
Right.
even born, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fascinating.
It is. It is so interesting and wonderful. And kind of like, so, speaking of like how we may not get it all right, but how can mothers like balance evidence based practices with their own intuition, mother's intuition, learning to trust that instinct, but still learning or leaning on solid medical knowledge?
Yeah. So I think both are really important. And I think it starts there with valuing both of those, not
Mhm.
discounting or downplaying either one. I think that's something I did early on when I was starting out in medicine sometimes is discounting a mother's intuition. And I had a surgeon that
Uh-huh.
um not put me in my place, but like he really helped me to understand just how valuable a mom's intuition is. And I remember him
Mhm.
telling me in regard to a certain case, if a mom says that something's
Mhm.
not right with their child, you need to really slow down and listen and like take a second look
Mhm.
because that mom knows her child and they might not be able to
Right.
pinpoint it or tell you what
Yeah.
exactly is going on, but when they say something's not right,
Mhm.
look
Mhm.
closer because they're probably right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that valuing that there really is something to the intuition, and then also valuing knowledge. And so
Mhm.
my mom used to always say growing up, everything in moderation. And I think that kind of
Right.
applies here. Our intuition is
Yeah.
influenced by our knowledge base. And so
Mhm.
as we're learning and as we're gaining this understanding of how baby develops and how feeding should look and how sleep works and all this, that then can shape our intuition to help us make better judgment in the moment when maybe we don't know exactly how to explain what's going on, but we just have a sense of what to do or not to do. And so
Mhm.
I think they kind of go hand in hand. But yeah, I think taking the time to learn and then in the moment, once you've done, the learning, you have to lean on that
Mhm.
intuition in the middle of the night when the baby wakes up and you're trying to decide, "Do I go in now? Do I wait? Do I feed? Do I" it's a
Yeah.
combination of what you've learned and then in that moment, your sense of what your baby needs. And so
Right.
I think they really can work hand in hand, but I think valuing both of them is where that starts.
Yeah, for sure. It is. I think that's also kind of the hard part too, because sometimes we don't want to be like listening to ourselves. We're like, wait, no, it has to be this. This is the way the practice is. This is the way the research shows, or this is what that person told me. But then we lose sight of like, I do know this little one, but and then and then it can go the other way too. We're
Yeah.
just relying on, like, our own things and not listening to, like, actual, like, maybe someone who's giving some good advice,
Yes,
and
definitely.
proper information. So, we talked a little bit about those types of aspects of, like, just trying to understand the difficulties of having the baby and those thought processes that occur. But what about, like, the whole thought process of, like, we're going back to work, staying home. We wrestle deeply with this decision to return to work after maternity leave. Also, because I have to say this because, I mean, there are countries that give a whole year of maternity
Yeah.
leave. And here we are. Some people in the US don't even, I mean, I have worked with nurses in different facilities who literally can only take 2 weeks off, 4 weeks
Mhm.
off because they don't have that PTO, they don't have
Yeah.
that FMLA because of the way their contract or, whatever work situation, their job description is.
Yeah.
And they don't even get like a proper, even that 12 weeks
Right.
of maternity leave. And they're, having to struggle because they need the money to put food on the table for their family and, take care of their family. And it's just such a tragedy and travesty, um, as to how things are for, moms in this very, very important stage
Mhm.
of life. And, and that kind of leads to that whole, like, very difficult decision of, like, stay at home, go back to work, and how did you navigate that personally? I know we touched on it because you've started Nurtured Nest, but talk a little bit about more about how that went for you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thankfully, I had a lot of help from the Lord and my husband, on this
Mhm,
front, but it definitely this has been one of the hardest things I've navigated, in motherhood for sure, and I mean, really in life, I feel like this was one of the biggest shifts for me, but before Selah was born, so my husband and I, his name is Nate, we had a lot of conversations about having kids, when to have kids, what it would look like after we had kids, and, for a while, we didn't really see eye to eye on some of these issues, mostly because in conversation about having children, my husband felt strongly that, well, if we're having them, then I would like you to be home with them. And I felt strongly of, I've worked really hard to pursue medicine. And it's not just that I've worked really hard to get here, but I've also always felt a calling to medicine and felt that this was
mhm,
something like the Lord put in my heart and gave me a passion for and skill at and has given it to me as like a gift to be able to help people in this realm. And so to me, these conversations of like giving that up have just always been very difficult. And so there was kind of this back and forth conversation on, what this would look like. And there was a moment after we'd already decided to go ahead and start trying to have children. We had been trying for a little while, not terribly long, but it felt like a really long time, and, because 'cause we'd already waited quite a while to even get to that point, and so then we started trying, and we
mhm,
we hadn't gotten pregnant yet, and every month it was really hard for me because I really wanted to be a mom and have a child, and But I had this moment where I came home from work one day, and my role in ped surgery is very demanding. I worked, they basically were 12-hour shifts, but then you would also take turns being on call, and so sometimes as much as every other day you were on call, and when you're on call, you work the 12-hour shift and stay late if there's anything going on, and then when you come home, you're on call overnight, and so I'd be taking call from home, which sometimes wasn't a big deal, but sometimes you were up most of the night, talking to the nurses, triaging things, returning parent calls, dealing with whatever's going on, and like you mentioned at the beginning, a lot of it was legitimately life or death things. So, very stressful, and then on the weekends, there were 48-hour shifts that we would work, and so it was very demanding. And then I had this day where I came home, I'd worked a really long shift, and there had been just really busy, really sick kids and doing a lot, and then I was on call, and so when I got home, I couldn't cook dinner, I couldn't do all these things because I just kept getting called from the hospital, and I had this moment where I just said and felt to myself and the Lord, like, "I can't do this. I can't do this and focus on a child. If I have a little baby that I come home to and I've been working all day and been separated from them, and then I come home and I can't even cook them dinner, I can't give them a bath, I can't put them to bed, I can't do anything because I'm gonna be stuck on the phone all night, and so even the time that I'm actually with them is gonna be divided, and it was like something clicked in my head, and I just felt like I let go, and I had this moment where I said, "Okay, you're right, and he's right, and, I'm gonna let go of this thing that I'm holding on to so tightly, and I don't know what that's gonna look like or what that's gonna mean, and I still want to pursue medicine, but I agree that I need to let go of at least what this currently looks like in order to receive this next thing that I want." And I heard God say more clearly than I think I've ever heard him in my whole life. I mean, not an audible voice, but I heard him
Mhm.
say in my spirit, I guess, "Okay, you're going to have a baby now." And sure enough, like 2 weeks later, whenever it worked out on that cycle, I took a test, like, the soon as you could take it, 'cause I knew I had heard him say that, and so I knew beyond a shadow of doubt that we would be pregnant, and sure enough, I was pregnant, and so yeah, so for me, that was kind of like the moment where I realized everything was going to really shift, but I also felt so much freedom after that, knowing that it was gonna look different in some way, and, um, that I didn't have to hold so tightly to what I knew. So then once Selah was born, we knew things would have to shift. We knew that my current role was not gonna be very conducive to being a new mom or raising small children, but we weren't sure what it would look like, and so after Selah was born, there was a lot of conversation about, could I go back part-time? Would that be something that's an option? Should I shift roles and do something outpatient with less demanding hours? Just a lot of back and forth. I interviewed at several places, really explored a lot of different options, but ended up I'd already been moonlighting for a hospitalist team before Selah was born and working some weekends for them, and so it ended up working out to where I went back and finished out my contract with ped surgery and then kept my PRN position with the hospitalist team, and so I'm able to work very, very part-time at the hospital in the evenings when my husband's home, and then pursue nurtured nest and be home with Selah and pretty much be a stay-at-home mom. So, yeah, God has, like, really helped and provided and guided through this decision, but that's not to say that it wasn't easy. Definitely the struggle before I hit that moment in pregnancy or before pregnancy, but then even once Selah was born, it was still hard to walk through that and the unknown of like, "Okay, I know I let go of this thing, but now I don't really know what this new chapter is supposed to look like." Feeling the pull of like, well, that's a lot of finances to give up and, what do we do with that? And just all these different questions that come with shifting roles into motherhood. But I'm thankful the Lord has really provided and set things up in a way that worked out for us.
Yeah, it's definitely not a easy decision, and it's very individual for every family and mom. And but I think the important part is what you're saying is letting go, because sometimes we can hold on to certain ideals or desires, dreams, or different things. And sometimes we think that is the way we have to go, but the moment we do let go, I have seen God bring something even more beautiful or better than what I had thought was going to be better for myself.
Yes.
And so I think that is something really, and of course, with wisdom and prayer, we do all these decisions. Um, but I have seen that in the same way that, when we let go of what we think is great, and I'm like, no, I'm going to cling on to this because this seems so ideal and wonderful, and this is where I want to be. And then I let go and let God, and then something always works out where it's just like even more and better than I had thought for what, nothing's ideal, nothing's easy, but it was the best plan for that time frame in our life.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely. He's good at
yeah.
that.
Yeah, and so that is something really important because sometimes we can hold on to things so much and have those expectations that leave us so disappointed. And that's something that we have to kind of learn because life is going to be full of unexpected things and a lot of different things that may come up. And if we're holding too tight to one thing, we might miss out on something else.
Absolutely.
So, um, but yeah, speaking of like, many mothers facing this difficult decision, it's a very individualized decision. And as you were saying, I felt medicine is a calling, which I feel sometimes that is what medicine feels like. And that's why it's so hard to give up. Um, um, Especially, that patient care and being able to be involved in um, this type of work is so unique. But how do you feel like, with the high demand careers like what you're talking about in pediatric surgery with, being on call every other day, night, that's a lot.
Mhm.
And, of course your choice was leading you this way, but it does make it hard for moms to balance that career and family if they're in those high demand pressure jobs. Do you have advice for that? Or like how do you deal with like with nurtured nest moms who may be having to do that? Or how does that work for um in the context of nurtured nest and coaching?
Yeah, we do. We talk a lot about return to work and navigating that, whether it's helping breastfeeding moms with pumping and figuring that out going back to work, or navigating childcare and figuring out what's going to be best for your family, and also talking through, the return to work and whether or not that's what's best and what you want to do in this season. I do find a lot of moms sometimes people have the freedom to make the choice in either direction, and a lot of times people don't. Whether it's that they have to stay home because they have no childcare that they're, feel comfortable with, or it's that they have to return to work because of finances or um, student loans or whatever the situation may be. A lot of times people don't have that choice. So it's definitely challenging. I think one thing that I encourage moms first is to kind of the same idea of letting go, but be okay with things looking different than they were before. Like, you're not the same person once you become a mom, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Hmm.
Work may have been very fulfilling and very exciting and all these things before you had a baby, and now you might absolutely hate the idea of going back to work. And if you have the freedom
Yeah.
to not, then, like, that's okay. You don't have to hang on to this career just because before maybe you had an identity in it or something like that.
Mhm.
And at the same time, if you do have to go back to it, I think especially if people have faith, my encouragement to them is God knows your situation, and if you truly do have to go back to work, He's going to provide. So either He's going to provide, maybe financially for a means that you then don't have to go back, or He's going to provide you strength to go back and to navigate it. And all of these circumstances and situations that we encounter, he's using them all to shape us and to mold us.
Yeah.
And sometimes the harder they are, the more that he's able to do with it.
Yeah.
And for me, I did go back to pediatric surgery initially after maternity leave for 3 months, and it was a really hard 3 months, but God taught me so much, and not only did he teach me, but now looking back, I think that part of that was he wanted me to have some experience to be able to help other moms with, because if I didn't have to go back, I wouldn't know anything about pumping when you go back to work. I wouldn't be able to relate to or understand what it's like to take your child to daycare or navigating
Mhm.
schedules with daycare and figuring out how to, work a nap schedule with daycare and all these things. There's so much
Yeah.
experience that I would have missed out on had that not happened. And so, in the moment, it can be hard. I didn't really want to go back, and it was a lot of
Mhm.
stress, but I see so much good that God brought even through that time. Yeah, I think giving yourself the freedom to change and trusting God to provide in whichever direction that ends up being, knowing that there's still good on both fronts. Medicine really is a gift that you can help people with, and there's a lot of good to be done and a lot of need in medicine. And so if you do go back to these roles, whether part-time or full-time, there's so much good that you can do there, and
Yeah.
there's also so much good you can do if you stay home full-time with your child. And so, I think, again, comparison is the thief of joy, and
Yeah.
I'm sure every mom who goes back working is envious of the moms who stay home and think that it's all, amazing and dreamy and wonderful, and staying home is hard in a lot of ways. So, I guess I should say too, I mentioned earlier that, things may have shifted and maybe you had this identity in your career before and now you don't want to go back at all. The opposite can be true. You could have longed to be a mom for so long, then motherhood happened and it's actually a lot harder or different than you expected, and you actually find yourself really wanting to go back to your job and kind of have some normalcy and have adult conversations and,
Right.
and I think that's okay too, like, all of these things, giving yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, that's another thing that we have to let go of is what you were talking about is that you mentioned identity, and I think that is kind of where, the difficulty lies, I think, is letting go of what we identify ourselves as sometimes, as that provider, clinician, or whatever our career was became our identity. And now this motherhood has come in and it's changed our identity and changed the way we view ourselves. But the identity of our previous work still is holding on to us. And I think that's kind of why in a lot of these episodes that I've talked with several guests about, I think it comes down to identity and purpose and calling and the mindset shifts that we take as we go through that journey in life and shift ourselves with each identity that we kind of face, depending on each decision that we make, each change of course that we make. And it's difficult, but it is something that I think we all have to understand and be aware of and accept those changes that are occurring in our life in these huge life events like motherhood and the definite decisions that we're going to be making regarding work and mothering because even if we try to balance it, even if we try to do both, it's always going to be difficult and it's always going to be something that we're going to have to juggle. But, that's to each individual person because, you know, as you said, some people wanted to stay at home, but then they're like, no, wait, I can't do this. Only I need to go back to work. Or some people who go back to work are like, no, wait, I just want to stay home.
Yeah,
So, every season's gonna be different also because the child grows up and changes, from the little tiny baby to the toddler to the kid to the college
yes,
student, and our lives are constantly changing with all of those seasons too. Our time, the
yeah.
availability of it, and what our needs are as And I think that's also important to also bring up is you
Mhm.
do have to remember that, God has placed certain talents and gifts and strengths and things inside of each of us. And we don't want to lose our own value that we have to offer to this world and just frame it only as I'm only a, I'm a mother. This is all I have to offer the world.
Right.
Because you do have a lot of other strengths. You do have a lot of other things inside of you. Some people are happy with, motherhood. That's their thing. That's their calling. That's their identity and desire to, do and live. And that's wonderful. That's awesome. That's beautiful. But others may feel suffocated in that.
Mhm.
And we have to learn to be okay and value each woman for each decision that they make. Because every woman
Mhm.
is going to have a different decision and a different calling. And that is a beautiful thing that we all have to be able to accept too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you brought up about seasons. That's another thing I talk with people about a lot and have found for myself is, like you said, every season might look different. And so,
Mhm.
you know, being okay with that change and adapting and also recognizing that how it looks in every season might look different. And so there's kind of this pendulum of like,
Yeah.
how much work versus at home, and that might
Mhm.
shift back and forth and back and forth. When the
Yeah.
kids are in school, maybe you're doing something different versus when they're this little, or, certainly
Mhm.
once they're off to college and that sort of thing. But I think what you're saying is so true of like not just losing it all completely, because there's still things I think God wants to do even in my own life through medicine. And there's plans that my husband and I have for the future and ways we can use medicine to advance God's kingdom. And, if I just let go of it completely, then it's not going to be something that I can use later on. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, embracing in some ways like the flexibility, which is another thing, once again, that us like type A people have a hard time with.
Yeah.
I would like to just have my like life plan laid out. And in these years, this is what I'm going to do. And in these years, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's not how it works, and I think God, again, designed it that way for a
Yeah.
reason.
It's like a day-to-day process.
Yeah, and someone told my husband and I that in regard to future ministry plans, but they said, "I just really encourage you to
Mhm.
hold all of your plans before God with open hands."
Yeah.
And in some parts of the world, when they pray, they actually pray instead of, like, with hands folded, they pray with their hands up like this, and it
Yeah.
symbolizes that in a way of, like, bringing it before God and
Mhm.
open hands. And so I've kept that vision with me and what that person said, and I
Yeah.
found that very helpful in motherhood of, bringing these things before Him, our job, our calling, our experience, and now our children,
Mhm.
and really holding them with open hands before God and saying, "What do you want me to do in this
Yeah.
season?" And then being okay, even once He maybe tells you what this season looks like, we can't just grab onto that and then
Yeah.
cling again, but keeping that with open hands too. And
Mhm.
so when the next child comes or the next stage comes,
Mhm.
you're again going back to Him with open hands and saying, "Lord, what is this season supposed to
Yeah.
look like?"
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. It's a daily renewal of our minds, daily renewal of what we want for our lives is constantly in the hands of the Lord.
Mhm.
And something that we learn to offer freely because we know that He gives freely and bountifully and wonderfully and lovingly into our lives. And it kind of brings me to the last point that I wanted to talk to you about is because you guys have done a lot of mission work, and medical missions is something a lot of people love to talk about, but sometimes and somewhere along the line, it becomes difficult to know how to do it, when to do it, and how to connect. Do you have any advice for those who like to do medical mission work and how they could maybe, get involved with that?
Yeah. So connection is everything in so many parts of life, but especially
Yeah.
in this realm. So there's a global, oh goodness, I'm gonna mess the name up, but it's the Global Health Missions Conference.
Uh-huh.
GHMC, and
Mhm,
it's an annual thing. If people are looking for a way to kind of like open the door on medical missions, I highly recommend this conference.
mhm,
And it's several days long. It's held in Kentucky at a church there, and there's so many good resources. There are ministries that come from all over the place and work all over the world, and they'll come and have tables and information, and then there's speakers and different sessions, and it's all focused on medicine and missions. And so it's a great way to just kind of dip your toes in, but also to make those connections
mhm,
that can then help you to take medicine around the world and use it for God's glory and to advance His kingdom. And so that would be probably my starting place if someone doesn't
mhm,
have any connections and they're looking to just kind of hear more about medical missions, learn more, and then find a way to get involved. There's so many great organizations out there and obviously can't go through all of them, but
mhm.
even just start Googling and look
Yeah.
up organizations. There are a lot, and there's some that will actually help to repay even some of your student loans if you decide to
Mhm.
work overseas and do medical mission work. And so that's a
Right.
great option for people who still have finances that keep them tied here and make it hard
Mhm.
to travel and go overseas.
Right.
Also starting with your local church too, depending
Mhm,
on, your church and how big it is and what kind of ministries it has. They may or may not have opportunities, but a lot of short-term teams have found
mhm,
that doing medical care in places they're going can be really helpful for opening doors and
mhm,
starting conversations and meeting a practical need in order to then get to the
mhm,
heart of the spiritual needs of the people.
mhm,
So, talking with your own congregation and your missions pastor if you have one, and partnering with them. Then yeah, finding other healthcare workers that are doing this. For us,
yeah,
it's looked a lot like of doing Zoom calls. Like as we meet people and they say, "Oh, I have this friend who's a nurse practitioner and they're working in this place doing this." And I'm like, can you connect us and then hop on a Zoom call and talk to them and pick their brain and get
mhm,
advice and make those connections. And it's been neat to see the Lord really like
mhm.
just kind of lay out this path for us and make a way
Yeah,
for us to be able to do some of this work. But yeah, those are a few starting places for people.
yeah, I do need to, yeah, like to reiterate that connections because the organizations who are working locally, they already know the criteria,
Mhm.
the needs, and what is required in order to go there and work and even do medical missions, and so finding those local organizations and connecting with them are very important. Because sometimes you can't just, there's a lot of other restrictions, requirements, and
Yeah.
document things like that too.
Yeah, and it's a big feat to do
Mhm,
take the medical supplies and
mhm.
to navigate the healthcare system in a different country and
Yeah.
what's legal and where do you get the
Mhm.
drugs. And
Yeah.
I should say too, mention that Samaritan's Purse is one organization that does a ton of medical mission work, and they have
Right.
hospitals all over the world.
Yeah.
So there's tons of opportunities with them, and they also
Mhm,
have a really neat program called they call it the DART program, but it stands for something about disaster relief. I
mhm,
forget what the A stands for. But anyways, this DART program, they will pay medical providers, so PAs, nurse practitioners, midwives, doctors, pharmacists, all these
mhm,
medical providers, and they will actually give you a salary if you will go and deploy for them. And they respond to all sorts of natural disasters and
mhm,
when there's crises and wars and things that pop up. And they build field hospitals in these places. So they've been in Ukraine and the Middle East and anywhere that there's been an earthquake, and they'll go build these huge field hospitals in these massive
mhm,
tents, and then they need medical providers to staff them. And so they need all different specialties. They do surgeries, they do pediatrics, everything. And so
mhm.
that's another great opportunity for people if they're looking, also because they're able to finance your travel, and they're actually paying you while you're there to go and work, which is pretty mind-boggling. Like, I can go
Yeah.
serve the Lord and do this awesome work, and I don't have to worry about, like, what is my family gonna do,
Mhm.
without this income for a month or however long it is.
Right, because that's what usually limits people from doing those types of things that they want to because they're worried about, "How do I pay my bills if I,"
Yeah.
or
Yeah, or
take care
even
of
the
my
plane
family,
ticket.
or even the plane ticket, yeah, and so that's really good to know, and I really appreciate your time, Rebecca. Thank you so much for coming on and discussing this really important topic, and
Absolutely.
I love how, you talked about, seeing how when you let go, have seen just the faithfulness of God and everything. And last words of encouragement that you want to share or anything like that?
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been fun chatting, and I
Yeah,
hope that there's some moms out there who find this helpful.
yeah,
Yeah, I just encourage all the new moms or longtime moms to keep coming to the feet of Jesus and letting Him direct your steps. That verse in Proverbs that says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths." And I
yeah.
found Him to be faithful to His word and faithful to that. And so I just encourage moms with that. And if there's any moms that are, needing help or guidance, I would love to walk alongside you and help coach you, and talk more.
And I will have all of Nurtured Nest and Rebecca's information in the show notes where you can check it out and learn more and get connected with Rebecca. So thank you all so much for listening. What a beautiful reminder that the work of motherhood is both holy and refining, a place where God shapes us through surrender, service, and love. It is also a powerful reminder that God is just as present in our moments of wrestling as He is in our moments of certainty. Rebecca's story reminds us that the decisions mothers face, whether to return to work, cut back hours, stay at home, are rarely simple. Yet in the complexity, the Lord is faithful to guide, provide, and redefine what purpose looks like in each season. Rebecca's story is also such an encouragement for any mom standing at the crossroads of identity and calling, showing us that even when the days feel messy or uncertain, God is using every moment to nurture something eternal in us. You can learn more about Rebecca and her work at Nurtured Nest, where she offers evidence-based coaching and education to help moms navigate feeding, sleep, and early development with confidence and grace. If this conversation encouraged you, please share it with a friend who might need the reminder that she's not alone on this journey either. And as always, thank you so much for joining me here on Medicine Motherhood Missions, where we celebrate the intersection of healing, calling, and the sacred work of motherhood. Continue to spark hope wherever you are. Thank you. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions. We hope you found inspiration, insight, and a sense of connection in the stories we shared today. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners like you. Follow us on Instagram for updates, free downloads, and join a community of like-minded individuals passionate about making a difference through medicine, motherhood, and mission work. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Until next time, keep sparking hope, keep healing, keep nurturing, and keep making a difference. This is Johanna signing off from Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions. The medical opinions expressed on this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. Always consult a licensed healthcare provider for personal medical concerns or questions. The views expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast host.